How are you doing, Ian?
Doing good. We're chopping earlage right now, and hopefully by about 1 o'clock we'll be sealing the bag up.
Good. Really drying down fast. We got some guys chopping just west of town here, but they got the hammer down.
You know, we did silage a couple weeks ago, and our cover crop is growing good where we did that. And I think the corn that we're chopping today, the grain moisture content's around 30%.
Oh, good. You bag all your earlage there, or you put them in those silos, or what do you do with that earlage?
Well, even though we have lots of silos, they're kind of obsolete. So we're making a 200-foot, 12-foot diameter bag, and that should take care of our needs.
Hey, well, good afternoon, everyone. I think we'll go ahead and get started on this month's Minnesota Climate Adaptation Partnership webinar. Thank you all for being here today. We are very happy to have a series of presentations and a conversation about Minnesota agriculture and some of the practices that various producers and farmers are adopting as they're looking at changes across the state and across their operation as well. So today's presentation will include Doug Albin, Ian and Richard Cunningham, Caroline Hegstrom, and John Jager as panelists who will be sharing a little bit about their experience. And it will also be moderated by Dennis Todey, who's the director of the USDA Midwest Climate Hub. And I also want to give a big thanks to Mark Dietrich and Daniel Isaacson from the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, who helped pull everything together here today. So just a quick logistical piece. Well, one, we are recording this webinar just so we can have it on record, and are planning to post this and other webinars in the series at some point in the future as soon as we figure out those details. Just a note as we're going through the presentation, we are going to be taking questions through the Q&A feature of Zoom. So if you have a question, go ahead and click on that Q&A box, which should hopefully be down at the bottom of your screen. You'll have a chance to see other questions that people are asking as well. So you can, if there's one that you would like to see answered, you can upvote that. And we'll have a portion of the webinar at the later part to answer some of those questions. And then the final piece is that we're trying something a little bit new with this webinar. So we're going to be sharing some video that's been compiled. I'll apologize in advance if it's a little choppy as we go through, but we will share the link so that others can see that and you could view it at your own time, on your own time as well. So I think at this point, I will hand things over to Dennis, who's going to provide us with a little bit of an overview and an introduction to the producers as well. I think you're on mute there, Dennis.
There we go. Now you can hear me. And you can see slides. We good to go?
Yep.
Yep. You think after years of working on Zoom, I'd learn how to unmute, but I'm still not doing that yet. So thanks for having me down here. It's a lovely day here in Ames. I think it's a pretty good day generally around. Sound like some of the producers were getting harvesting done in the field. So it's good to hear that progress is going, but that's a whole different conversation that we could have another time, and I'm happy to do that. We are going to get to the producers here in a little bit. Part of what I'm going to do first is to talk a little bit about the Climate Hub and a little bit about changing climate conditions in agriculture that are driving some of the changes that the producers are going to talk about that we've seen here. some of their adaptation efforts. We are dealing with a set of issues that is changing underneath what agriculture is doing. So it's forcing agriculture to adapt and to change some of their practices to deal with those changing climate conditions. So first off, just to talk a little bit about the hubs themselves, we are a part of USDA. We're split into a couple parts of USDA. I sit in what's called the Ag Research Service, and other part of the hubs are in the Forest Service. There are 10 hubs across the country. We are about a little over 6 years old now, 6.5 years old, started in, under the Obama administration. And the idea of the hubs is just to provide information about the changing climate, about climate conditions in agriculture. We don't have any money to provide. We don't regulate anything. Our job is to help inform. I'm from the government. I'm here to help, right? But that really is what we are, to try to develop information and share information and help people adapt to conditions, shorter and longer term. We deal with a wider variety of crops. Obviously, corn and soybeans are big ones that are in our region, in our 8-state region. But you know, Caroline is going to talk about some different crops that she does. And in some cases, those non-row crops have even more weather impacted issues that we try to deal with from across our region. We work a great deal with partners and stakeholders. Those include people within USDA and people that are, you know, at the land grants. We're going to introduce you to one of the land grant person here a little bit later. And you know, other conservation districts, partners, producers, to help share knowledge, share information, and be able to develop new types of information for people to be able to use. So basically, you know, our goals are to improve climate resiliency for especially agriculture to be able to deal with these issues and stay productive, to educate, help improve decision making, and to build partnerships. That's essentially what we are to do. I also should say the region we share is with another hub called the Northern Forest Hub. So if you're dealing with forestry issues in the region, they would have the better expertise to deal with. We deal with the rest of the agricultural issues. So let's talk about some of those longer term issues. And this could be a whole session on its own to talk about different issues with climate and agriculture. But we're going to hit some of the high points, particularly some of the biggest issues that you're dealing with, especially in parts of Minnesota. If you talk to producers, most of them, and a lot of what we're going to talk about today, are issues with water. Why issues with water? One, the basic climate of our area is relatively moist, that we are a relatively wet area, though as you go further west, we do get wetter, we do get somewhat drier. But if you look at what has happened over the last 100 years or so, we are seeing our climate get wetter. And this is what this graphic shows. This is from the last National Climate Assessment, which was released, this part of the National Climate Assessment was released in 2017. And what this shows over Minnesota and the whole upper Midwest is that we are getting wetter. The darker green the area is, the more precipitation increase there has been over that area. The darkest green is greater than 15% increases in precipitation. So you can see Minnesota, Iowa, the Dakotas, parts of Michigan particularly have all become much wetter. And it's not only an issue with becoming wetter overall, it's when that precipitation is coming. If you look down at the seasons, and these seasons are slightly different from what you consider other seasons. We use climatological seasons. So winter, for example, is all of December, January, February. Spring is March, April, May. Summer is June, July, August, and fall is September, October, November. And you look at the places where we're getting wettest, you'll see, especially over Minnesota, spring precipitation and fall precipitation are 2 times when we're seeing our biggest increases in precipitation. And I'm sure the producers will tell you that they just love, and I say that sarcastically, more rain in the spring and fall because there's a number of activities going on then. Soils are less covered at that point, and those produce another set of issues. We are seeing some increases in summer precipitation, but not quite as sharp as those transition seasons. We'll talk more about those here in just a second. And we're also seeing more overall. This graphic shows the data from 1895 until the present. And each one of these points on here is a 2-year sum of precipitation. So this ends in 2019. And what this shows is that the 2018, 2019, 24-month period was the wettest 2-year period in Minnesota's history. You can see the trend very clearly getting wetter, but particularly the last 2 years, the 2 years summed was the wettest 2-year period in Minnesota. Spring and fall increases, and all three of these graphics, the next three graphics, are give us the same view. 1895 until the present, and the precipitation totals for that time of year. So here we're showing Minnesota averaged for March, April, May. And again, the blue line showing the increasing trend, the red line kind of a running average. That we are seeing more wetter springs above the longer term average, and very few that are below the long-term average, and really very few very dry springs. And a very those are pretty uncommon. Dry springs tend to be better for producers to be able to get field work done in the springtime, but that's an issue we're dealing with here. Summertime, June, July, August, we're again seeing that overall trend increasing, same kind of thing. And fall, also the long-term trend is also the same kind of thing. There was a dip in the early part of the 2010s where we did have some drier falls, but generally all three of these seasons have seen increased amounts of precipitation. Now, what are the issues related to this? Well, it's variable across the Corn Belt, but increasing rainfalls, especially when we don't, during, the outside the growing seasons, we don't have crops on our field. So fields that particularly don't have any kind of cover on them are prone to this kind of thing. If they're tilled and don't have anything covered, you're going to get runoff. So that's why we encourage, and I'm sure these producers will talk about this, keeping fields covered, reducing that soil loss. You can also get nutrient loss, where you've applied some kind, if you've done manure applications or other kind of fertilizer application, and then you get heavy rainfalls on top of that, we lose not only the benefit of that to producers, but then that gets into water, and we get water quality issues related to this. And that is why there's been a huge amount of increased work in the way of water management and making sense of what's happening in the way of precipitation and how to manage water more effectively, getting it off when it's too wet, and even to the point of saving it and reintroducing it sometime during the summer when things actually do dry out. Correspondingly, another issue, we talk about warming temperatures, and we are getting warmer, but again, there's a little bit of nuance in this. Same kind of graphic as we showed with temperatures. This is, excuse me, with precipitation, this is temperatures. The redder something is, the more it's warming. So Minnesota is prime, along with a lot of other part of the northern U.S., has seen the most warming over the last century, greater than 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit warming. But again, that is somewhat different based on time of year. Much of our warming has occurred during the winter on the lower left-hand side here. Generally warming winters, and for those who like winter sports in Minnesota or ice fishing in some of the cases, that is becoming a little bit more of a problem as winters have somewhat warmed. Summers, on the other hand, have not warmed quite as much, but there's a little bit of detail related to that. Now we're going to show you, this is a graphic from Minnesota, and this is summertime temperatures. And the upper left-hand side is average high temperatures. On the lower right-hand side is average low temperatures. So we're comparing the highs and the lows. And what's happening is there's a lot of variability in here, but the average highs are slightly increasing. Statistically, we would say it's a lot of variability, but quite level. But our overnight lows are getting warmer. So we're decreasing our daytime temperature range. We don't get as warm during the daytime, but our nights are getting much warmer. And that produces a different set of issues related to heat stress in cattle, where you don't cool down at nighttime. It can stress crops a bit when you have the extreme cases. For humans, it's not a good situation to be able to have. And this overnight warming seems to be related to a lot more moisture in the atmosphere. Also, our frost-free season is, because of these overnight temperatures, it's getting longer. The average spring freeze is getting earlier. The average first fall freeze is getting later. That does provide some options for producers to be able to grow some longer season crops or to get cover crops planted in the fall. But the problem we have in the springtime, particularly with some of these wetter springs, is even though the average spring freeze may have passed, getting access to the field may not always be possible. And this spring freeze variability is one that we've identified as a problem for specialty crops, especially perennials, that may break dormancy and be vulnerable to freeze before that last first freeze. Some other things that have happened because of this, our cropping areas have changed. The Dakotas and parts of Minnesota have become major corn and soybean growing areas, especially the northern areas, moving out some of the small grains that used to grow there. That has been a big change related to this. I mentioned increasing moisture in the atmosphere, and I'm going to move along here since we're running a little bit over time. Other sideline issues related to some of the changes are some changing weeds, getting weeds, changing their ranges where they're more they're susceptible. Also issues related to insects, changing insects and the range of insects. Warming winters reduce die-offs, and longer growing seasons sometimes allow multiple life cycles of an insect that cause additional problems for us. So if you want to learn more about some of these, there's a recent document that I was part of called Climate Change Indicators for Agriculture, basically talking about some of these, a wider set of these. And here's the URL for this, or if you just Google Climate Change Indicators for Agriculture, you should find this, or contact me and we can get you in touch with that. One other resource is Climate Adaptation Resources for Agriculture that is our partner hub at the Northern Forest helped to develop. And then I also wanted to talk about, introduce one other person, Dr. Heidi Roop, who is a recent hire at the University of Minnesota and an extension specialist. She's an assistant professor there. Another excellent resource to be able to talk about changing climate issues on a wide range of issues, agriculture, natural resources, whatever. She is going to be on today. She may be able to chat somewhere along the way, but we're welcoming her to some of the partnerships that we have across the Upper Midwest. And I'll get here. This is where you can find access to me, Twitter, our website, and my email access if you want to know more about us. So at this point, I'm going to stop the share and move on to introduce our partners here, or introduce our panelists. Let's see if we can get this up here. And okay, now let me swap this. Okay, now you're seeing the panelists, is that correct? You seeing that correct? First is John and Betty Jaeger from Southeast Minnesota. In Goodhue County, the Soil and Water Conservation District, they farm corn, soybeans, pasture, and forage. They graze cattle, and some of their weather challenges are erosion and runoff, and they are adapting this by cover crops, wide corn rows, and low-cost feedlot fix. Ian and Richard Cunningham in Southwest Minnesota, they're a fifth-generation family farm. They do corn, soybeans, and pasture. Leaders in the National Association of Conservation Districts and the Pipestone Soil and Water Conservation District Supervisor. They do on-farm demonstrations. They have issues with wind and water erosion. They do cover crops, annual grazing, and windbreaks. Doug and Lois Albin from Southwest Minnesota. They do 1,300 acres of corn and soybeans. Supporter of research-driven policies and programs, dealing with water from a riverbank and dealing with saturated buffers. And you'll hear more about all these as we go along. Caroline Hegstrom from Northeast Minnesota, owner of the Boreal Forest, do berries, fruit orchard, market vegetables, and broiler chickens. And her challenges are drought, temperature fluctuations, and wind. And she's done adapting with drainage issues also. So we will hear more from our producers here in just a minute. If you have questions for them, please go ahead and start, and then we'll turn it back over to Joel for a video we're going to show now.
Great. Thank you, Dennis. And again, thank you to the producers for joining us here today. As I mentioned, we're trying something new. We're going to share a video, see if this comes through. I'll keep an eye on the chat, so maybe my fellow panelists and others who are on can let me know how things are going. When, just as a disclaimer, we did test this a little bit. It seems like there's a slight delay between the video and the audio, but we'll find a way to get the video link out to you all so you can also view it on your own time. So we'll go ahead with that. Yeah, and just
As part of a study, there's 4 producers here in Goodhue and Rice County, and we are planting 30-inch rows with and without cover, 60-inch rows with cover, and then what we call a balance. So we plant 4 rows and skip 2. And we're using annual ryegrass, radishes, turnips, kale, some clover. We're just trying to do something more to try to keep something living on the ground as long as possible. I mean, you know, you plant corn in April and you harvest it in October, November, and if we can keep something else growing in there, I think it's a lot better for soil, for you know, critters growing in the soil and stuff like that. So this is an attempt. I winter my cows on this field, so they'll have good grazing here all winter, or either till it's gone or till the snow buries it. But this is the second year that we've been doing this, and we've had last year it was a lot later. I think we'll get a little earlier start on the harvest, and I think they'll be able to utilize more yet. But it's just a way of seeing what we can do, getting something else growing. I know on our 30-inch rows where you have cover, it's nothing like it is here. I mean, it's just really short. But the funny thing was, on my plot anyway, last year, I don't know if it'll happen this year, but at last year, the best yield was on the 30-inch rows with cover. And I never would have thought that. I mean, maybe it was a fluke. We'll see, you know, what happens this year. But it looks like it's a pretty decent crop this year. We just got enough moisture. Could, you know, we're not any too much, but we've been all right, you know, in this area. It's a little heavier ground here. This is kind of creek bottom ground here. So one of the bad things, if you ever have a terrible heavy rain, this will flood. So, but otherwise, it really grows terrific crops.
Thanks, John.
Mm-hmm.
And we knew eventually through the course of time, with the ice flows and the river flowing, eventually it would take and wash out a certain amount of it. And then finally, like everything else in nature, it would hopefully stabilize. Well, after 7 years, this is what we've got left. We've got about, a little more than a third of it left. And I would say it's probably been through, well, I know it's been through 2 years of heck because the river never did go down last year. It stayed high the entire time. And we had to take and cut off a section of the pipe because as the tollwood sod mat eroded, we needed to take and turn around, and the ice flow was actually bending the culvert. And so we needed to take and cut the culvert off and reestablish it back a little further. It's going to be real interesting to see how long this portion of the tollwood sod mat lasts. My father-in-law, his idea was that he should take and establish a protective barrier with rocks in the background. And that's exactly what he did. He had neighbors and, well, a few of his son-in-laws. We hauled a few rocks in here and we helped him establish the rock in the background. If we were going to do that same thing today, it would probably get hired. And I would guesstimate it's probably going to cost about $70 to $80 a foot to take and haul rock in, get it established where we wanted it. So that gets to be fairly expensive. This tollwood sod mat that we're standing on, knowing that the life expectancy of it is not going to be nearly what that is, but the cost is unbelievably cheap. We're talking about $10 to $12 a foot. And so the logic behind it is that we've got the natural resources here, we've got the trees to help take and tie everything in, we've got the gravel from the stream, and we can take and bring that all in and incorporate it. And if we have to do that every 10, 12 years, well, that's pretty efficient.
Doug, thanks so much. We're going to continue on with this discussion this afternoon, but let's do a drone.
Let's do that.
Great.
And I would say our local SWCD is a real good place to go because they have interactions with so many people doing so many things, and we have Minnesota Soil Health Coalition. We're a member of that. There are lots and lots of places, but it brings to mind a quote that conservation doesn't begin with a practice. It begins in the hearts and minds of the farmer. So quite often we have a willingness to try stuff, and we like to borrow as many ideas from other people as we can, but sometimes we're just going to try some stuff. And we're going to use our own gut to decide, were we moving in the right direction, or did that move us in a direction we didn't want to go? Part of the evolution of the cover crops and all that stuff is to try to fill in the gaps of our pasture production. You know, we started out, we would bale some of it when we had 40 cows.
Yeah, 40 head, they're not going to keep up with 100 acres of pasture, so we grazed what we could, and then we'd take cuttings off of paddocks otherwise.
And then eventually we got to so many cattle that
We needed to start rotating out permanent cropland into annual grazing.
And the interesting thing that we found there, I can remember a couple of years ago, Richard was so excited, he brought the iPad out of the combine and said right to the line where we had our annual grazing last year, and it didn't go ideal because it rained while we were grazing it and it got all mudded up and we thought we'd done a bad thing. 2 years later, we were 10 bushels over the rest of the field in beans.
2 years later.
2 years later. And we had 250 bushel corn a year in between. So we thought, well, you know, maybe even though we were disappointed in how it went, it still provided a benefit of having that diversity to the soil, and apparently better water infiltration, better water holding capacity. So we consistently see better yields in the land that we take out of the corn soybean alternation and introduce another crop.
I've learned that a good phrase that covers what I'm trying to do is being sustainably fruitful. And it's actually a term I'm taking from someone else, and I can't remember the author of the book, but and it talks of, and it's really about kind of putting together both the environmental side of things and the industrial side of things. Whereas industrial agriculture really is about production and at the cost of the soil, typically. And then environmental agriculture is kind of more about giving up fruitfulness in regards of taking care of the land. And what I want to do is marry those two concepts together, and that is to take care of the land, be a good steward, think of that as it's a future, and only have it for a short time, and then I'm passing it on to here. And so I want to keep that land clean, I want to keep the water clean, and I want it to be fruitful. I want it to be continuously productive and giving forth for our community and for our family, and making it a family home, a farm home versus a business. Of course, that's part of it. You have to be a business and manage it well. But that it's really our home, and that the farm is a part of our home versus making the farm our life and then the home second. So we're not very good at that balance right now, but we're hoping that that'll be the balance in the coming year or two.
I know I should have done this at the beginning, but introduce yourself, Carolyn, then I'll have the girls introduce themselves.
So I'm Caroline Hegstrom, and I'm the owner of the Boreal Farm. And we started in 2016.
I'm Al Hegstrom. I'm the youngest.
How old are you?
I'm 12 years old.
I'm Eve Hegstrom. I'm 14.
Well, thanks for being here today, and thanks for having me.
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Joel. Appreciate that. Okay, we have about a little over 20 minutes available to work with to hear more from our producers and get chances to get some questions and answers. If you have a question, go ahead and type it in the question answer box, and we'll get to as many of those as possible. And we'll try to make sure we get a chance to hear from all of our folks. Let's do this first as people add some more of their questions. What I'd like to hear from you is to have each of you quickly introduce yourself, give us one of the issues that you're trying to deal with, changing weather, climate issues, and how that's affected your operation. Why don't we go around and do that? Doug, let's go ahead and go with you first.
Thank you, Dennis. And that particular piece of property that we've got down there, it's my wife's family that owns that. And my father-in-law, we good here?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. My father-in-law established a, you could call it a dike, or you could call it a levee or a retaining area down there. And he did that probably 50 years ago with help from NRCS. And since that time, it's held up fairly well, but a lot of that area is washed away, so there's hardly anything left. Used to be able to drive a pickup on the top of the dike, and you can't do that any longer. Main challenge we've got down there is the increase in rainfall events, the intensity of them, and the fact that there's been an awful lot of accelerated drainage coming off of a bluff country area to the west of us. And of course, everybody wants to get rid of their water at the same time. And I think eventually we're probably going to get to the point where we need to establish a water plan for the Minnesota or Yellow Medicine River.
Okay, thanks, Doug. Let's go to Ian and the Cunninghams. Why don't you give us one example from your operation?
Well, just to put this out there, I'm a person who doesn't believes that the idea that human activity is responsible for a change in the climate is overstated. We've been operating in the same location for 135 years, and we've endured all kinds of weather. We've just come off of 2 very wet years. This year, at the end of June, it quit raining, and we've been very dry. So having said that, if we were wanting to mitigate carbon in the atmosphere, the way we're farming is exactly what we would want to do. We're reducing our dependence on fossil fuels and synthetic fertilizers. We're keeping plants growing during a longer period of the year, so photosynthesis would remove carbon from the air and carbon dioxide from the air, and store carbon in the ground in the form of increased organic matter. So we just kind of have to be ready for anything. We do find that by following the soil health principles, We have a better soil structure that allows us to get our crop planted and harvested. We have better water retention. There was mention of storing water and then having it available to apply on the land later. If you can increase organic matter in soil by 1%, you can store roughly 1 more inch of water. So if you would increase your organic matter by a couple of percent, that would be equivalent to a very large reservoir of water, and you don't need to build a structure to hold it, and you don't need to buy or maintain equipment to pump it back on the land. So we're doing everything we can to increase the health of our soil. And the principles we follow is we want to keep the soil armored at all time. We don't like bare soil. The quickest way to lose moisture is bare soil through evaporation and fluctuating temperatures. We want to disturb the soil as little as possible. Have a living root in the soil as long as possible. We want to have diversity of all kinds of life in our soil, and we integrate livestock because science is yet to duplicate what comes out of the back end of a cow. Do you have anything to add, Richard?
Okay.
Many of our practices focus on stability in our changing climate. As he said, we've come off 2 very wet years, and I'm happy to say that as far as our 10-year rolling average, it would be very hard to pick them out of the lineup. We don't have much concern about compaction. We don't have much concern that we are unable to get into the field when we need to, due to our soil structure, due to our drainage. So we're very much going for stability no matter the situation.
All right, thanks. Okay, John, let's go to you. Same question for your operation.
Well, I guess one of the main things I started with cover cropping is to plant a crop and then harvest it in the spring. So I did that for a few years, and then just lately now I've started cover cropping and then just terminating it in the spring. It seems to work pretty good. I've been doing a lot more no-tilling. Last year, for the first time, we planted greens, so you go right into the standing cover crop when we were planting corn in there, and then terminated it a week or 10 days later. And we did just part of the field, and so far we'll be able to tell when we get picking, but just by looks you can't tell any difference, so I don't think it hurt us at all. And I live about 7 miles from the Mississippi River, and Wells Creek runs right through my property, so I have to be quite concerned about my runoff too, because it can directly feed into Lake Pepin. So that's one of the reasons for the cover crop and the buffers and stuff like that. So I guess that's about it for me.
Okay, Caroline, let's go to you. We have a little different background here with the different crops you're dealing with here. So.
Sure, we are a CSA, vegetable and fruit farm primarily, and we added broilers this year. And our challenge this year has greatly been drought, actually. We're close enough to Lake Superior that the wind has been pushing off all the rain, and we're 8.5 inches behind in rain this year. So that has actually resulted in irrigating so much that my well pump broke this morning. So you've been seeing me kind of leading a little bit, and that's to manage that. And I have actually had to pull our shares this morning before this started because there was no way for me to cool the soil down. Now we're supposed to be 80. We had 26 degrees last week. And so we've had a real swing shift in temperatures. We've had sustained high winds at 25-mile-an-hour winds for weeks at a time, and with gusts, sustained gusts up to 50. So it's been hard to plant, especially seedlings in the spring, and have them survive that. And so that's been our challenge, is that we've always counted kind of being close enough to Lake Superior that we can count on having that protect us a little bit, and that hasn't been the case for us this year, and a little bit until last year too.
Okay, thanks, Carolyn.
Mhm.
Okay, we got about 15 minutes left and we have some questions coming in. So Leslie asked, I think this was kind of addressed, but just to confirm, Leslie asked about the stream bed project with the riprap. Were you able to access info or resources from their watershed district?
That would be mine, Dennis.
Yep.
The original project that my father-in-law did, it was a convenient place to take and dump rocks, and not too far away from his place. And he went down there and he found out that it helped stabilize the stream bank. So he had a good friend of his that was with NRCS, and his advice was to take and help mitigate the stream bank erosion in that particular area, to take and stabilize with the rocks. When we did the Tollwood sod mat project, we actually involved. I'm on the Minnesota Corn Research and Promotion Council, and so I have access to a lot of agency people and a lot of advice. And I sought their advice when we established the Tollwood sod mat, did the tiling project, the control structures for the tiling, and for the saturated buffer. Fortunately, we've gotten grants to help with that. And thanks to Mark Dietrich and pulling a few strings there, we were rather successful, I think.
Okay, thanks. I think this starts with the Cunninghams, but then may go other places. Folks talk about cover crops, experiences, pros and cons. So we'll start with the Cunninghams. Anybody else who wants to chime in after that?
Okay, I guess I'll go first unless Richard wants to. We find that a lot of farmers are looking to add a third cash crop to their operation because they see the advantages of that. Quite often that crop might require special equipment to plant and harvest. It might have a market that is not nearby, or a thin market that could easily be oversupplied. So we find, since one of the 5 principles of soil health is growing living root as much as possible, I guess it also provides ground cover and some diversity. So maybe it hits 3 things with cover crop. We have a ready market for it because whatever we grow, the cattle will eat. And we don't feel bad if we don't get to graze something. We don't feel like that is a wasted investment, because we have the livestock that lives underneath the ground that we care the most about. So we've, 75 years ago, it was common practice on this farm to plant dwarf Essex rape into the corn on the last cultivation, and then we would graze Western feeder lambs on it, and they'd eat the corn and the cover crop. And as we got into some, we kind of got away from that. But I've experienced growing cover crops since the early 80s, and we've been really serious about it for the last decade or so. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. Does anyone else want to chime in with their experience with cover crops?
Sure. Yeah. Am I on?
Yeah, you're on, John.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, on my farm and the ground that I rent, is quite a bit of it is highly erodible because, like I said, I live in the bluffs in southeastern Minnesota. So pretty much all the farms I run are what we call 2-story farms. And you need to keep that soil in place, especially on the hilltops. And I found that planting these covers up there really helps. And along with, going to less tillage, I think it's really been beneficial to me in my operation. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, John. Anyone else? Okay, let's go ahead to another question from Troy. There's a comment about water holding capacity of soils and organic matter. I can partially take this that yes, that is a fairly commonly recognized issue, that the more organic matter you have on a soil, the more water can be held. And that, you know, typically Midwest soils are very high organic matter, but we've seen a decrease in that over time. Would anybody else want to chime in on comments related to that?
And I guess I'd like to add that simply growing cover crops is not what you get, not the pathway to higher organic matter and better water infiltration. You really need to do the whole package. We need to have undisturbed soil, so those earthworm channels and the decaying roots and things like that provide pathways for the water to get deeper. Also provides pathways for new roots to explore more volume of soil. So it's not simply cover crops. We saw last year we had a lot of prevented planting around here, and when the 1st of September came, you know, they didn't get planted till the 1st of August, so they could get a payment. 1st of September came, they were out there tearing those cover crops up when it would have been a much bigger benefit to the soil to leave them. But they really believe the only reason that they didn't get their crop planted the year before is because they didn't get their fall tillage done. And the irony about tillage is the damage that's done by tillage is mitigated in the short term by more tillage. So it's really, you got to kind of kick the habit and be a believer to achieve that higher organic matter with better water infiltration, better water holding capacity.
Caroline, let's shoot a question at you. The farm that you took over, were there other conventional crops before you started doing this? And have you seen a change in the soils based on what you're doing up there because of your practices?
So we're actually located at the headwaters of the Amity Creek, which is a protected watershed within St. Louis County. And then we also have glacier till, so very rocky, silty soil. And what was here before us was sheep and dairy farm. And there was 5 generations of families who had done that prior to us coming here. And then the land was fallow for about 30 years. So all of that grew up with scrub and brambles. So we've had to start over again. What we have used a lot of, and we're high, so we have a lot of hills and a lot of low spots. So very undulating land, sometimes can be 25, 30 feet between bottom and top. And we've been using wood chips to, create rows to create soil. So we'll put down 500 feet long rows of wood chips about 12 inches deep. And that'll help us grow. We don't have cows at this point, which is something we'd like to have. But that is one way we've been using organic matter to create soil from the bottom up for us. And we've been then planting our orchard in that and our berry fields in that. And we've done that for acres.
Okay, thanks, Carolyn. There's a couple different comments that have come in. We don't have too much time to go into this, but there's a comment about what'd be most persuasive in getting people to change conservation practices, and then Roberta asked about have your actions inspired other people around you? Why don't we do a quick go round of any of those real briefly in the last couple minutes we have here. Have you inspired other people around you?
Dennis, if it's all right, I'll take and give my viewpoint. The way to take and get farmers to change is that you've got to have the backing from the universities through research, ARS. You've got to have the backing from NRCS and other government agencies that have funding sources, whether it's Department of Ag or if it's Bowser, any of those things, because right now margins in farming are so tight, we don't have any room for experimentation. We need to take and do whatever it takes to keep us farming for next year. And using the university and others, we can engage with them to take and try practices on their land and maybe try a little bit on ours. And then ultimately what we need is the technical guidance and the assurance that what we do is going to be an enhancement and profitable.
You might want to go now. Okay. All right, this is John. My experience is I'd much rather lead by example than being forced into something. So I've taken the approach, I just go ahead and do it. And I know I get a lot of sneers from some of my neighbors, but it seems to be kind of effective because in my area, there seems to be a lot more of it going on now. And, you know, you kind of maybe pat yourself on the back a little bit, you know, in the corner there. But that's basically what I would say is just go ahead and do it and show people that it can work. So that's all.
We've actually got a custom harvesting crew on the place right now doing some silage for us. And over the past couple of years, they've adapted many of the practices that we use on our operation because they figured they see so many acres with their chopping equipment. You know, if Cunninghams are doing this and constantly some of our top producers as far as tonnage, as far as yield, well, maybe they're not doing something wrong. Maybe we should give it a shot. And I know they've had a fair bit of success. I know they've had some trials with it, but if it works the first time, it's not going to be any fun. And if it always works, well, you're never going to learn anything. So we have, I feel, influenced some people in our area. So it's, you know, been nice to be that resource.
And if I can just add a little to Richard's story, where our local SWCD has been providing a free soil health assessment for anybody that's willing to do it. Originally, NRCS developed the kits with the idea the farmer would stop and pick it up and they can go home and do it themselves. But we send a couple of our staff out to have a conversation with the farmer and do some free soil tests and things like that. And everyone that participated in that got together for a meal last winter, and Richard was there, and the fellow in front of him was the father of the guy that's running the chopper. He turned around and says, "Do you mind if I talk about your operation?" And so he got up unasked to say that they have that his son, who's shopping for us right now, he wanted to make some changes and used our operation as the example of how things should be better. So he's you know, they've changed their operation in increments, and I would suggest that to farmers that wanted to adopt soil health. Don't change the whole thing at once. Don't just suddenly quit doing tillage and quit putting on fertilizer and expect to have results. So start small, and it's much better for an older generation to recognize a good thing and encourage the younger generation to give it a try than the younger generation to tell the old man everything he's been doing all his life is all wrong. So that would be my advice.
All right. Yeah, Carolyn, did you want to add anything quickly here?
No, everyone's kind of covering it. They're doing a great job.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Carolyn. So thank you all very much. We're drawing quickly to the end of the hour here. I appreciate all the producers willing to share their experience, and that it's a great opportunity to talk about conservation aspects, reacting to climate issues, and trying to protect soil and other issues around Minnesota. So thank you all very much for your candor and sharing your experiences. And I'll turn it over back to Joel now.
Great, thank you, Dennis. I would also share that thank you to our panelists and our panel of producers as well for taking the time, especially this time of year, to share their thoughts and experiences with us. I'd also like to give a thank you to Jeff Zagweid, who has been helping us. He's been on detail from USGS and has been helping us with these webinars and helping the Northeast USGS Climate Science Center. So today is his last day in that role. So thank you, Jeff, for doing that. And then also to Dennis for moderating, and Danielle and Mark for pulling this all together for us. So I would ask, you know, as we like to do at the university, I'm trying to learn a little bit each time. So please take a couple minutes to fill out this evaluation that should pop up shortly after we end the webinar here. And of course, you can always reach out to me, Joel Larson at the Water Resources Center, to get information or have other topics or other things that you'd like to share. So just a final thank you to everyone, and we hope to see you at our next webinar.
Surprised we even.
Thanks, Joel. Thanks, everyone.
Adam Wilkie. Oh, Adam. Oh, God. Yeah, Adam. What's good is and what's so